what's going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing a review for James Gunn's Superman. This video has the potential to be one of my longest videos ever. It also has the potential to be maybe potentially a little bit shorter. I don't know. I've been putting off making this video for a really long time, and I also had to go watch this movie a second time before I can make my review for this video because I genuinely loved it so much walking out of the theater the first time. But the more that I'm thinking about it, the more I have a lot of little nitpicks here. But that being said, the movie's incredible. It's really, really good. If you haven't seen it, I 10 out of 10 would recommend going and seeing it. Let's dive into this, shall we?
My movie review.
Okay, so right off the bat, I do want to go ahead and say, growing up, was 100% a Marvel fan, right? I wasn't as huge on DC. I think that DC has a couple of comic book runs that I really like. I think that The Flash has a couple that I got really into. And I think that the CW shows are definitely something that I enjoyed as a little kid. But that being said, I was never a fan of Superman, quite literally never. I thought that since the first time I saw him and I understood the fact that he was bulletproof, he had laser eyes, he had frost breath, he was faster than the fastest man alive, Barry Allen, in some iterations of the comics, I always thought this was a character that's way too powerful, that it's almost uninteresting to read, because how do you kill somebody like Superman? It really would take somebody who's either the smartest man alive or somebody who has even more powers, and it just was something that really took me out. Back when I was younger, if I was to read a comic book, I would pick Marvel over DC because DC always had these larger-than-life characters, and it was something where it's I would pick characters like Hawkeye, where you see him get exhausted, you could see him be tired, and you could really feel the human part of the character. And for Superman, I never really got that. So I love the fact that for this movie in particular, and James Gunn even said this in a tweet that he posted out, I want to say yesterday, that we've had a lot of Superman movies that really dealt with the super side of the character, and it dealt with all the superpowers that he has, and it really dives into, the fact that he's a Kryptonian, he's an alien. What would, the real world, how would they react to the fact that there's an alien who has all these powers and is, trying to protect us and be our savior? And I like the fact that James Gunn mentioned he really wanted to focus on the man side of the character, and I think that this movie does an incredible job at that. I think that this movie is incredibly overstuffed in a way that I think is very beneficial, but like I said, I had to go watch it twice. I do think if you're somebody who casually watches movies and you plan to go watch this movie in theaters and you're only going to watch it the one time, you really need to be locked into this movie because there's a lot of blink and you'll miss it kind of moments, and this movie also has probably 5 or 6 subplots, which for me personally, I do think could be very overwhelming. I understand that this is a very comic booky movie, and James Gunn didn't want to make it 3 hours long. However, in a lot of senses, I do feel like this movie could have benefited from maybe an extra 20 minutes or so. And something else that kind of sucks about this movie is because it's going so fast, a lot of moments kind of just get brushed past, and that's one of my main gripes that I will have with this movie. Overall, I think it's great. I think the action sequences are fantastic. I think that the pacing is relatively solid, but there are a couple of characters throughout this movie where you get to the end of it and you're like, damn, that guy probably would have been my favorite character if we got maybe more than 2 scenes with him, and I feel that a lot throughout this entire movie. I think overall, if I'm going to start off with my complaints, one of my big complaints is we don't spend a lot of time with Clark at all. I think that one of my main issues with the Batman movie that came out with Robert Pattinson, I know a lot of people are really huge fans of it. I always have the hot take that I don't think it's that great, and one of the main reasons I don't like that movie is because one of the most interesting parts of comic book characters to me is that double life side of them where they're juggling their life as a regular person with a regular day job, and they're also dealing with the fact that they're a superhero at the end of the day. And with this movie, I think what they do better than the Batman with Matt Reeves is in this movie, the stuff with Clark Kent is relatively early on into the movie, and then you also get a sequence where you get to see Clark Kent kind of being Clark Kent and Superman at the same time, which I think is really interesting. David Cornsweet has a lot of work to do in this movie to make it where he has very believable Superman, a very believable Clark Kent, and they're different enough. And then on top of that, he has a different persona, which is Clark and Kent merged into one whenever he's hanging out with people who know that he is Clark Kent and Superman. And so I really love that dynamic. I think it is really interesting. So stuff when they're on the farm with the Kent family, that's kind of a different version of Clark Kent. Even though he's still wearing the Superman suit, he feels like Clark. And I think that that's awesome. But I do think that in a world where we get to finally see the Daily Planet and we get to see some of the dynamics within the Daily Planet, which I love, every scene inside the Daily Planet was phenomenal. And it's one of those things where every single person in that room seemed like they were one of the smartest people in any room. And I think that that's fantastic. I like the way that it felt like a real working atmosphere. And I love the fact that they all bounce off of each other relatively well. And you can tell that they really have a good team dynamic there. And I've seen a lot of people saying, hey, make a spin-off about the Daily Planet. I would second that. I think that making it a sitcom like The Office would be really cool. Personally, I would really love My Adventures with Jimmy Olsen. like, James Gunn has kind of mentioned that there's two people he's potentially going to be doing spin-offs with, and it's the Terrifics and the Jimmy Olsen character, and I do think that that'd be really cool. And like I said, with the Daily Planet, and especially, I just love that dynamic. I think that it's really awesome. So overall, I just wish that we got to see a little bit more of Clark Kent in there. And then on top of that, I think that something that I don't like about this movie 100% is because this movie is in a very established universe, there's a lot of little character moments where we don't know what characters know which things. And Perry White seems to already know that Clark Kent is Superman, right? Like, I could be incorrect about that, but that's something that is incredibly unclear. But whenever he first sees Clark Kent at the beginning of this movie and he's like, Clark, you're late, he gives him this look like he understands why he's late. And then at the end of the movie, he kind of gives Superman that same look whenever Superman's like, yeah, Lois, I'll give you an interview. And they're like, yeah, let's go into this other room so we can do an interview. Perry gives him this look. And so it's like one of those things where it's like, does Perry White already know that Clark Kent is Superman? And then like Jimmy Olsen being Clark Kent's best friend, but we don't see them interact at all in this movie, made me a little upset as well, because that's like a really huge relationship in the comics, and that was one of the things I personally was most looking forward to this movie, with Clark Kent and Jimmy Olsen kind of being best friends, but they never really interact throughout this movie. And another thing that kind of bothers me is throughout this movie, anytime we're in the Daily Planet and Clark's not there, there's never once a reference to it. And that's my thing as somebody who nitpicks the hell out of movies. I always hate when a character like does something and they go away for like 3 days or 4 days or something like that, and then they go back to their day job like nothing ever happened and they didn't just randomly disappear for a couple of days. And that's something that I kind of wish they could have addressed here. Like I said, that's just a complaint about there not being enough time in the movie. I think James Gunn does a really good job with all the other elements. That's such like a nitpicky thing for me to talk about. But whenever a movie poses a question like, oh yeah, Clark Kent kind of sucks at his job, like literally everybody collectively agrees, like, how does he get the front page story, and how does he keep getting these interviews with Superman, and how does he even get to be this good of a journalist, especially with him being late all the time and him being clumsy and him having all of these mistakes and errors? How did he get to be, one of the best journalists who gets to have front page papers all the time? They never answer it. In fact, he's barely even in the office, which makes it even a bigger question, especially at the end of the book the end of the movie, when he gets a front page entire thing for Molly, the falafel guy. It's really interesting. But that being said, not to chime in too much on the Daily Planet stuff, that's just something that I wish they fleshed out a little bit more, because it was really good. And that's what I'm going to say about this movie every time I talk about something else that I'm nitpicking the hell out of, is it's really good, so I'm complaining because I wish we had more of it. And I kind of wish that, like, we had a Superman sequel that was slated and we're getting ready for that to happen, because James Gunn seems like he's going to be taking some time off before doing a direct Superman sequel, which is totally fine. I think a lot of people have been freaking out about that and are just like, no, we're going to have to wait 5 years. I want to go ahead and say this to kind of compare it to another superhero franchise. The first Thor movie came out 2011, right? Then we had Thor: The Dark World, which came out in 2013. So that was just 2 years. But then after that, we had Thor: Ragnarok was 2017, 4 years. And then Thor: Love and Thunder, which was 2022, which was 5 years, but maybe take a year off for COVID, that would still be 4 years in between movies. I feel like that's very realistic in a universe like this where it's established and there's going to be a lot of characters. Like, we're potentially going to have another Batman movie in the next couple of years. We're potentially going to have a Wonder Woman movie at some point in the next 4 or 5 years. And James Gunn is clearly establishing some kind of Justice Society, Justice League, Justice Gang over here. And I think that with him potentially doing that, it gives us time for other characters to get introduced, Superman to show up in those other projects, and then get his own sequel. I think it'll be totally understandable if they wait a couple of years to do that. And David Cornsweet seems very on board to play this character for the next 10 years, so I don't think they need to rush into having him show up again. But that being said, the future of the DCU looks very bright, and will probably save me talking about the future of the DCU for the end of this video. Another thing that I really want to talk about, obviously talking about the Daily Planet, I haven't talked about Lois at all. I think that Rachel Brosnahan is one of the standouts in this movie for sure. I think that every interaction she has on screen, she kind of like steals the show for me. I think that her interviewing Clark, that scene is about 11 minutes long, but when you're watching it in the moment, it feels like maybe like 4 minutes, because everything just flows so perfectly. A lot of her questions that really catch Superman off guard are absolutely fantastic. And their dynamic between, once again, I blanked on his name for a second, David Cornsweet does a phenomenal job of kind of transitioning from Superman to Clark to Superman to Clark. And in this scene, they do it so seamlessly where they'll talk about something for a little bit, talk about something for a little bit, and then, you know, Lois will overstep a little bit and he'll be like, you know why I can't talk about that. This is a personal thing. We can't talk about this. And them having to like stop the recording and be like, take this seriously. You should be taking this more seriously. And I do kind of like the fact that like she is trying to hold Superman accountable. From our understanding, this is the first time ever Superman is having to like face accountabilities for his actions, which I think is a very interesting thing. And it kind of goes with the whole thing of Superman being like very plucky and optimistic. He's somebody who's constantly just always wins every battle he's ever done. And he automatically assumes that everybody in his life is going to be a good person. That it is a very interesting side of Superman to see the first time ever people are questioning him for his actions, the first time he's facing backlash for his actions. And I like the fact that this film decides to start off with him losing his first ever battle and how he decides to get up and immediately go back into battle, even though his Superman robots are like, hey, you're only at 83%, you just lost, are you sure you should do this? And the fact that he's getting in over his head at the beginning of this movie is awesome. I really like the fact that we're kind of seeing a Superman who has too much confidence and is finally having to like take a couple of losses in his life and are having to kind of understand the fact that like he needs to work on certain things. He's always kind of had this idea that like he's perfect, and in a lot of senses it does feel like Clark has had things handed to him in life, like back to the Daily Planet stuff. He's getting front page, you know, articles because he gets interviews with Superman, but he is Superman. And I really like the fact that like he's having somebody challenge his belief system, and Lois just does that absolutely perfectly. I think that their dynamic in this movie is absolutely phenomenal, and the love story is so believable. They just have incredible chemistry with each other that even though there's such a limited amount of time with them together in the first act, and then you don't really get it again until the final scene, I think that it works. It works really well, and I do really love that. I think that their relationship dynamic is fantastic. Another dynamic that I absolutely love, the Justice Gang. I love the fact that they don't really seem like they want to be teammates at all, but they have to work with each other. And I just love anytime you get a dynamic like that, where it's like, hey, here's my coworkers. Yeah, I don't like them, but we work together. And seeing it in a superhero dynamic is a whole lot of fun. I like the way that they all fight very differently and they kind of get in each other's ways a little bit, because it kind of establishes that even though it's assumed that they've been working together for a really long time, because when Superman works with them, he's kind of like a honorary member of the Justice Gang, helping them out and kind of working with them a little bit. It does definitely seem like they've been doing this for a while and they bounce off of each other at least a little well, but because, you know, Guy Gardner is really cocky and Hawkgirl is just kind of like violent to the max, they don't necessarily work as a team very well, and I'm excited to see if they flesh out that team dynamic a little bit more. I'm very happy to know that we are going to be seeing them in Peacemaker, which is right around the corner. So anything is possible with that. I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun. And I'm just really, really excited to see the future of those characters in particular. I will say one thing that I do kind of don't like about those characters, once again, I'm going to nitpick the fuck out of this. This is something that is very minor, and it's just something that like the advertisements and knowing the behind the scenes stuff about what's been going on with them, I really was expecting more with those characters. And it does kind of bother me that they really just gloss over one of the most interesting things about those characters, which is those are characters that are funded by a big CEO, and they're heroes for hire, which is a concept that I feel like Marvel and DC have both not really addressed in the cinematic universes at all, which is something that's really interesting. Is Superman has to be Clark Kent, because if not, he wouldn't be able to afford his apartment, he wouldn't be able to afford to live, he wouldn't afford to have groceries or whatever, so he has to live this double life, and it makes it a little bit harder for him to be Superman because he needs to be able to step away from his day job every once in a while, whereas these people, their job is saving people. And I think that there's an interesting commentary there where Superman saves people because it's the right thing to do, but in a world where people like Guy Gardner are just out here saving people probably for the money of it, is kind of interesting. And I think that there was a very missed opportunity to have some kind of interaction where at some point Superman kind of like talks about the fact that like, you guys are working for a billionaire. Billionaires are kind of unethical, and you know, you guys are doing things really recklessly, and you guys are just kind of like here to quickly do the job and get it done as soon as possible. And because of that, stuff like the kaiju fight where Superman's like, we have to save this guy, we have to make sure that we can get him out of here alive and we can take him to an intergalactical zoo, or, you know, just protect him. And they're just like, nope, kill the guy as quickly as possible, get out of here, get our paycheck. And the fact that that never gets addressed throughout the movie is really annoying to me, because they go out of their way to explain, hey, this is a team that's funded by Maxwell Lord. Hey, this is a team that Maxwell Lord is paying them all to do these jobs. And, it just goes to show that, like, even though that's something that potentially could be built upon in the future movies, I feel like it did not need to be even mentioned in this movie. I think that you could have just showed that this is a group of heroes that work together, not explain why they're working together, just kind of explain that, somewhere out there, somebody put these three people together. But the fact that they had to initially be like, it was Maxwell Lord, they're funded by a big billionaire, and then not do anything about that in the story is kind of weird to me. And then similarly, to kind of complain about some other nitpicks that I have about this movie, James Gunn went out of his way to make sure this is not an origin story. You do not need to know anything about, Superman's past, because we're just kind of going to throw you right into it. But then they decide to make a big portion of this movie, Superman's origin, about the fact that, like, he's the last son of Krypton, and the important message from his family, and, the whole, he has secret harems, and hey, you're the last son of Krypton, you need to plant your seed, and you need to make sure that our family lineage continues, and all that really deep, dark, fucked up stuff. And it's so weird how this movie was like, yeah, we're going to skip all of his origin, it's not that important, and then would do something like that, where it's like, you need to know that he's the last son of Krypton, you need to know that he got sent to Earth on a spaceship, and you need to know all these things about it. And it's one of those things where part of the reason I think the box office for superhero movies consistently gets lower is because they don't do origin stories for characters anymore. Like, I personally, really big fan of Thunderbolts. I think that what they did with it is fantastic. But it's one of those things where it's like, I understand why that underperformed at the box office. A lot of young people who want to get into superhero movies aren't going to be like, oh, this character who's in this TV show, that TV show, this movie, oh, I need to watch 6 movies, oh, I need to watch this so that I can watch this movie. Yeah, it feels like homework, and it feels really exhausting. And on top of that, you have to deal with the fact that people are going to just assume that you know the origin stories of these characters. And it's one of those things where it's like, if I was a 12-year-old boy right now and I wanted to go watch this Superman movie, I would be confused as hell, because what's going on? He starts off in a fight where he's already lost. He goes immediately, tries to fight again, and like, they're slowly over time giving you his origin story. And it's like, at what point does it become unnecessary that we didn't just spend the first 10 or 15 minutes of this movie with a couple montages showing you his origin story? So once again, just a nitpick there, that I wish this movie was a little bit longer, because they kind of decide, we're not going to give him an origin story. And then later in the movie, there's a lot of very crucial things where it's like, if we understood his origin, we'd understand his point of view a little bit better, but we don't. We glossed over that origin story. And it does kind of bother me a little bit, because as somebody who, like I had mentioned earlier before, not a super huge fan of Superman, I wouldn't mind having spent a little bit of extra time being like, here's the destruction of Krypton, here's Mon Pop Kent teaching him a little bit. And obviously we don't need to see the first time he, learns how to use his heat vision, or learns how to do this, or learns how to do that. But at the same time, we are here with a superhero who's fully established and almost has nothing to learn throughout the course of this movie. He gets some self-doubts because, he sees the end of this video that he's been watching since he was a little boy, that's kind of told him that, like, you're our last hope. We're sending you to Earth so that you can be a good person and you can lead them and you can help protect them, because they need somebody to help protect them. And he learns that the second half of that message is really terrible. So obviously he's got this shock factor to him. But he doesn't overall learn anything about, like, the losing a battle doesn't really teach him a lesson. The interview with Lois doesn't really teach him a lesson. The interactions with all of the other superheroes that he interacts with throughout this movie doesn't really teach him a lesson. And it's not until he has the conversation with his father about, hey, you are the person you choose to be. You will be given all these different, pieces of advice throughout life, and parents will give you the tools that you need, but you take those tools and you do whatever you are going to do with them. It's your job to decide who you become as a person, and you're not a bad person because your parents said you were going to be a bad person. You took this message, took what you thought it meant, which was be a good person, and I think that says more about your character than anything else that this message could possibly say about you. And I love that scene. I think that scene is incredible. And overall, we get that scene, and then we later get the monologue where he's explaining to Lex Luthor why he is human. And I think that that's all beautiful, but it's also one of those things where it's like, he doesn't learn a lot about, like, being Superman, aside from the fact that, like, he reminds himself that he is Superman and he is a good person, which I think on the one hand, really great. I think the story about, like, him being more human than a billionaire to Lex Luthor who's totally willing to destroy an entire city because he wants to kill one guy, I think that's awesome. And then to speak about Lex Luthor, because I haven't talked about him, and he's arguably the best part of the movie, Nicholas Hoult. I have been on the Nicholas Hoult train for probably the last like 4 or 5 years. He's incredible. This man is absolutely phenomenal in everything that he's in. He's always a standout performer. And in this movie, he has so many subtle facial expressions that are just absolutely phenomenal. He has this range. He's able to do really like cartoonishly evil things without it feeling like a cartoon. And it's just one of those things where it's just like, here's the threshold of it being too much over the top. Here's where Nicholas Hoult is. Right below it, perfectly threading that needle. And I just think he's so spectacular in this film. I think that his dynamic whenever he gets face to face with Superman is so good. They have like 3 or 4 scenes where they're having conversations face to face, and he at no point flinches. He at no point is scared. He doesn't have this like terror, even though Superman is somebody who could easily rip him in half, and he just feels so tough. And I really love that. And I think the fact that like he has this much envy and rage towards Superman, and he's the type of villain where he's going to destroy an entire city because he just wants to kill one person. And I think that that's awesome. I will say, if I'm going to nitpick the hell out of everything, and I'm going to nitpick the hell out of Lex Luthor, the reason he ends up failing in this movie is because he decides, you know what, on top of just killing Superman, I could also do this other thing. And something that I don't understand is he cares so much about getting legal permission to kill Superman, but he goes and does a bunch of illegal things so that he can get the permission to kill Superman. And at that point, you're doing like an ungodly amount of illegal things in foreign countries so that you can get permission to kill Superman. Why don't you just kill Superman? Why were you like, oh, I need to wait until I'm legally allowed to kill Superman? And I'm sure there's a good answer to that. Like, he's a public figure. You can't just kill a public figure because everybody will know. You know what? I just answered my own question. Never mind. Ignore the last like 30 seconds of that tangent because it made no sense and I answered it on myself. That being said, talking about some of the other great things about this movie, the world building, absolutely phenomenal. Couple things that I want to give praises to. One, there are so many brands that get introduced here. CC Jitters, Big Belly Burger, the Choco Oreos, whatever the fake brand of Oreos is, absolutely phenomenal. I am so excited for a world where, one, less product placement. Obviously, there's occasionally going to be some cars that are, you know, a specific brand, or that's a specific brand because that's partially how they fund the movies. But I love the concept of you see a billboard in the background and it's something in universe. That makes me so happy. In a world where the most recent Jurassic World movie that just came out, there's a huge distracting scene where you follow a Snickers wrapper for a solid like 45 seconds. It is so exciting to see Superman fighting in an area that's kind of like Times Square, and all of the billboards, everything in the background is all things that exist in their universe that doesn't exist in ours. And that is so refreshing. I absolutely love that. I think that that's awesome. I love all the different news channels and all the different news anchors. I love there's a News 52 channel. That is such a cute nod. I thought that that was absolutely adorable. And I like the way that this movie is able to kind of like really flesh out the fact that like this is a comic book world. There's a kaiju fighting in the middle of Metropolis, and then the majority of the people, once that battle ends up wrapping up, just carries on about their day because that's just a normal thing that happens here. And I think that that's awesome. I love little stuff like that. Just the one-off conversation, which I've seen some people complain about, but when Lois and Superman are having their conversation and in the background they're fighting a fifth dimensional imp or whatever, and people are like, oh my god, why didn't Superman jump in to fight them? It's like in comics where they have like a specific character is fighting against another character, and like I'll use Marvel comics because I read more of them. There'll be like a Daredevil storyline where he's fighting against a couple of supervillains at the same time, and they'll be like, oh my god, why didn't why didn't Spider-Man jump in? Because he's also in New York, he can help him out. But it's like, that would be like a Justice Gang comics issue where Superman's not jumping in because Superman just wasn't written into that scene. And I think that that's actually really awesome. I think that that's such a subtle way to do stuff like that, because it'll make more sense when you start having characters like Peacemaker, who's doing something big in a big city where other superheroes exist. And it's like, why aren't they helping Peacemaker? Well, because this is a Peacemaker movie. So I thought that that was cool. I really like that. And I just think that the world building in general is just phenomenal. Talking about the future of DC, Supergirl is going to be so goddamn good. Millie Alcock showed up for about 20 seconds in this movie. I think she's going to be absolutely phenomenal. I'm so excited for Supergirl. I think that that movie's going to be fantastic. I think that the suit looks fantastic. I'm excited to see Crypto again. I think that Crypto was a star in this movie, and I think that his dynamic with Superman was absolutely hilarious. And it's really relatable to me because, like, I love dogs, don't get me wrong, but dogs are kind of similar to like children, where it's like when it's not yours, you want nothing to do with it. They're so annoying, they're obnoxious, and they can be really like annoying to take care of. And I just love the dynamic with like Superman having to yell at Crypto multiple times to get the point. And I think that that's just so realistic. I think that that's awesome. And overall, I just love the comic book feel of this movie. I love the action sequences. I will say some of the action sequences have been slightly overhyped. I love the Mr. Terrific fight sequence. I think it is really cool. I don't think it's better than any of the individual moments that we got with Yondu using his arrow. That being said, I am going to be making a video ranking James Gunn's superhero movies, so that'll be on there for sure. But I do think there's a couple of action sequences with Superman flying specifically that are sick. I think that when he fights the kaiju and he's doing like flips and stuff in the air, that's cool. That's legit. That's awesome. But yeah, overall, had a really good time with this movie. One of my favorite bits probably in the entire movie is got to be the moment where Mr. Fantastic is opening up a garage to his T-Sphere mobile, whatever he calls it, and the garage takes like 30 seconds to open, and him and Lois Lane are just kind of awkwardly sitting there like and she's just like, you have a flying saucer but you can't get a garage door that opens faster. I love that. That's just absolutely hilarious to me. So yeah, overall, really love this movie. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think that there's such a rich sense of comedy, such a great sense of heroism. I think that the fact that you watch this movie and you genuinely feel like you want to be a better person now is also incredible. David Cornsweet, he's a star. He's going to be phenomenal. I think that he's going to be a huge star in the upcoming like 4 or 5 years. I think that he's going to be a household name probably by next week. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this movie, and if I had to give it a score on a scale of 1 to 100, like I said, this ended up being a long video. Whoopsie, my bad. Sorry, guys. But yeah, that being said, if I had to give this movie a rating on a scale of 1 to 100, as I typically do, I give it a 93. I think it's really good. I think that the action's incredible. I do think that there is some wonky dialogue moments. Like, I do really dislike there's a couple of moments where, like, when the Justice Gang shows up to fight against the kaiju, there's like a news reporter who's just like, and I just want to remind you guys that this is the team that is funded by Maxwell Lord. And it's like, why would they say that? Because not to be that guy. For one, I think that would probably be common knowledge, and especially because, like I mentioned when I was talking about the Justice Gang earlier, it's implied that them and Superman have been working together for probably at least a year now. They would know that that's a Maxwell Lord funded team. But that being said, overall, I like this movie. I love the needle drops. James Gunn feels like James Gunn. Let's go. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe. I will hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out.